Hello, welcome to the video. Tips for bands and artists that are going into a professional recording studio session. This particular video, we are going to be talking about arrangement, composition, the part of the songwriting process before you even book your studio time. Who am I? My name's Adam Barnes. I've been recording music for about the last 20 plus years. I ran my own independent recording studio from about late 90s through to 2007. Since then I've been working as a freelance independent engineer, producer across many studios across Sydney, Australia, and recently have become the head engineer of One Flight Up recording studio in St. Peters. So let's get down to talking about your band going into the studio, and you want to get the most out of your time in that very expensive exercise. Let's not kid each other. Recording professionally, it's a very costly exercise. And while we've kind of gone through a few revolutions with home recording, what has sort of come to fruition is that there is still a need for the big recording studio, not necessarily as big as it was in like the 70s, 80s and 90s. But I think that just a dude at home with, you know, a few mics, a sound card, and a digital audio workstation, it's awesome for writing, it's awesome for pre-production, but it's still missing something in terms of that fully fledged production that you hear, that you're trying to emulate from stuff that you listen to in your own collection, from those big bands. So what separates those recordings from what we can do at home? A lot of it is the gear, but a lot of the times it's the fact that you're going into a professional space with a producer or at least an engineer that has done it a lot of times before, and they kind of know how to coax the best out of bands, artists, instruments, sounds, and the room that you're recording in. Usually, if you record at a studio, the people there are very intimate with the way that the room sounds, so that's the kind of thing that you get when you go into a recording studio. But that's not all that the equation is. There's definitely some other parts to the puzzle. One of those things definitely is on the band or the artist. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how you can do your due diligence leading up to a recording session. Okay, let's from here outward talk about bands. Most of this will apply to solo performers, or if you are working with session players in your recording session, it can be a little bit different. But let's move forward from here talking about bands. Okay, so before you would actually book the studio time would be where we would tick off the first box that we're going to talk about, and that is songwriting, song composition, song arrangement. Now, this is definitely something that you can work with a producer, and when you get into the studio, flesh these things out. But if you can get as much of this done beforehand as a band, you're going to save yourself time. You're going to have more time to do things like getting sounds and performing takes, rather than figuring out basically where you're going with the song. So what do I mean by that? A lot of times the arrangement of a song will actually make it sound better in a recording. And quite often that will be, like, especially heavier bands, they will write a part that might actually be a bit too busy. So if there's like some really, really heavy section that has like all downstroke palm mutes, and the drummer's doing some really, really crazy tom feel that's got, like, you know, triplet notes, like heaps of stuff going on that might sound like awesome in the rehearsal room or live, that stuff quite often might not work, or have to be just arranged a little bit differently for the recorded version of the song. Sometimes that means simplifying. Now, it doesn't mean that you play dumbed down versions of your songs in the studio. It means that you just have a bit of a sensibility of what works and what doesn't. And quite often a really busy part, unless everyone's super tight, like I'm talking like almost computer tight, those things can sound messy and unprofessional. Whereas if you reduce the amount of things that are happening in those sections and really batten down the hatches on the band's performance on a simpler part. Yeah, that's a lot of sessions I've been in where I've actually thought a section of the song sucked, to be honest with you. It sucked. I didn't like it. And it wasn't really because I didn't like the way that the song went into that section or that change. It was because it wasn't as tight. So this happens a lot on bridges, especially in heavier music, where a bridge will get really heavy, right? And quite often, a lot of bands will think that heavy means play more shit. And often that does work, but at the same time, sometimes just the chord that you've changed to is the heaviness. You might not realize it, but going from chugging on the A for 32 bars and then going down to the low F is heavy because see how that's an arrangement decision, that you've been on the A for that long and that you're leaving somebody wanting, or maybe they don't even know that we can go down to that F, and you've got it as a weapon in your bag. So these are the kind of things that are cool to think about. So that's just touching the surface really on arrangement and composition. And now this is something that you might not be able to do, or maybe you think you've worked on this stuff and have it good. And sometimes it does take a producer's ear to be able to decipher what's working, what doesn't, offer suggestions. And often a producer won't actually necessarily rewrite your song. A lot of producers will just say, this part here, it's not working. We need something different here. And sometimes it can be given with direction in terms of I think that the song needs to get heavier here, but I think that the kick drum can't be as busy as it is now. These are all of the things that some bands have a really good ability to self-produce, and other bands don't. And it doesn't mean that they're not good at writing songs. Far from it. Production and arrangement and composition is kind of almost a different bag to writing songs. Somebody that is a really good arranger sure as hell isn't able to come up with the ideas and the riffs. They're able to rearrange that stuff into a semblance. So don't think that somebody coming in and saying, I don't like that part, or you need to change that part, is somebody wanting to rewrite your song. It's more of giving you a sensibility of what we've been talking about in terms of light and shade, what will work in a recording, what will translate well, what will actually maybe sound heavier or more airy or more mellow or more emotive. These are all the things that we're trying to create in the recordings that we capture that honestly give it the human element. So figuring all of this stuff out instead of trying to coax it out of the artist on the day in the studio for the first time that the song's been heard by the producer is definitely a factor that can help. So if you're working with a producer in the studio, you may just find yourself in the situation where you're recording a track, just realize the arrangement of one of the songs is just not serving the sonics of that track. It's too busy. It's not tight. It doesn't work. Now imagine that happening on the day of your recording, where the producer's saying to you, I think we need to come up with another part. Or the band's like, we don't like this part anymore. It's the only thing holding back the song. We just need to come up with a new bridge or whatever. Imagine that happening on the day of the recording when you've only got 1 or 2 days in the studio. A lot more pressure to deal with and probably not going to yield the greatest results. Although sometimes these magical moments do happen in the studio where a band on the fly comes up with a new part and that becomes the part of the song. But relying on that is a mistake. You want to make sure you have as many ducks in a row before you go into the session, the studio session. And this arrangement thing where you review all of your songs and just make sure nothing's too busy, nothing's too crazy, everyone's happy with their parts. You know, it can be a good opportunity for somebody in the band that might have always been thinking, I'm not sure about this part. Discuss that stuff, you know, during your final arrangement meetings of the band and rehearsals. Try to flesh out all of this stuff before you go into the studio, and you're just going to have a way better time at it. And the producer, engineers will recognize that the band has put in that work. And instead of them sort of starting at square one with these ideas and concepts, the band's already done 80% of the work, and then the producer only has to take it the further 20%. So how do you figure this stuff out? How do you actually arrange? Well, it leads on to another subject that I want to cover in these series of videos, which is actually doing demos of the songs before you hit the studio, pre-production recording. I want to cover that in more detail in a future video. Self-recording, pre-production recording. Now, one final point I'll make on this whole arrangement composition talk is a little bit controversial. It may come across different ways to different people, but bear with me on this, okay? So you need to write to your strengths, and all artists, bands do this. Don't write stuff that you can't play. Make sure that you've got it tight. And this will lead into another video part of this series, which is talking about rehearsing and practicing for the studio. It's not just a case of your usual Zen band rehearsal. It's not just a case of running through the songs a few times on your acoustic guitar a couple of times a week. There's different approaches and techniques that you can use. I'll give you a sneak peek at to what most of that will be talking about, and it's metronomes and practicing to metronomes, and bands, individual members practicing parts, not just in the rehearsal room with the band going full tilt, but everyone taking their parts home and practicing them to metronomes. Even if you don't record with metronomes, you practice with the metronomes. That's basically the whole secret of that next video series. But we'll go into that. Definitely a big part of preparing for the studio is practicing. So let's wrap this video up. It's quite long now. Thank you for sticking around. I've realized halfway through talking that I'm going to do this in parts. So this is obviously the arrangement and composition part. If you feel like you really need some more help with this, with somebody outside of your band coming in, hit up my website, adambarnes.com. That's Adam Barnes without an E, BARNS.com. The link will be down there. I offer services where I will come out and help bands with pre-production, the pre-production stage, and even the writing and composition stage before they hit the studio. So, hit the website, shoot me an email, ask any questions, comment below the video. We will be back with, what do we talk about? Metronome and practicing and pre-production recordings. Thank you for listening. I'm Adam Barnes. Talk soon.